So the second speaker of our session now is Anna Marušić. I hope I pronounced correctly. She gives us a view from a different perspective, from a player in the scientific field, which is very important, but it's sometimes at the side, and these are the publishers, actually, the journals. And Anna Marušić is a professor of anatomy and the chair of the Department of Research in Biomedicine, so that's the background, biomedical research, biomedicine and health at the University of Split, the School of Medicine in Croatia, and holds an honorary professorship at the University of Edinburgh. She is the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Global Health and president of the European Association of Science Editors. So she has really a very broad perspective on the topic. She chairs the research committee of the World Association of Medical Editors. Professor Marušić is also the chair of the Cochrane Scientific Committee, and that links you to the previous speaker, I assume. Professor Marušić is the founder of the Cochrane Croatia and takes responsibility for research as its research coordinator. She also founded the Croatian Center for Global Health at the University of Split School of Medicine. She is on the steering committee of the Equator. This might be also something maybe you will cover here, which means enhancing the quality and transparency of health research on a global scale, so to say. Here it is on a network, also something that Lex is also working about. So this is now another perspective, and we are very happy that you could come to here. So the stage is yours, Anna.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. And although Alex and I work on different projects related to research integrity, I'm going to talk as an editor. And that's also a long talk because editors, I think, have a lot to say. I will talk about the position of journal editors in research integrity field, of what we can and what we cannot do, how in medicine we try to increase the integrity of the publication, and then in the end I will talk about some recently developed guidance on how journal editors and journals can collaborate with research institutions during investigations of research and integrity. So most of you are dealing or know much more than the rest of the world about your organization, and you deal with the problems that arise when planning research and conducting research. And we as editors come at the end of another important part of research, responsible conduct of research, and that is reporting and reviewing research. This is where editors come. We also have to be aware that there is no distinction or a border of what researchers do, what editors do, what research ombudsmen are tasked for, because good research and bad research present a spectrum. So we don't have a border between reporting, but everything kind of flows together, and then what we see and what we deal with is what gets reported and what gets presented to the public. And because probably the best public documentation about someone's research is in a journal article when it's published. This is why most of the concerns about research integrity come after publication in a journal. And this is why editors are usually the messengers. Very, very often they are blamed. Why didn't you see this? How come nobody noticed that this person cheated or that the data are fabricated or falsified? But this is not what editors can do. So we are there in a good position where we detect research misconduct. Usually delegations start in journals. So my position is, yes, we are there and we can see misconduct, but we are also in a good position where we can prevent misconduct, and more importantly, we can promote responsible conduct of research. And I think that in regard to research integrity, we are there as journal editors not only to promote good research and to publish exciting new developments, but one of our important responsibilities is that we are there to ensure the integrity of the published record. We have to ensure that what is published is really true. not true, but that it's valid and that it's good. And this is very important in medical research, in health research, because something that is published and is wrong can kill people. And we have seen examples of that when drugs had to be retracted or removed from the market because what was published in journals was false and caused people to die or to suffer. So there are examples from that, and that I will tell later about how editors reacted to such situations. But very often we are not that good at noticing it. This is a slide shown by David Waugh, who is a cancer researcher in Australia, and his hobby is to catch statistical mistakes in big journals. So he writes to Nature and Science all the time saying, oh, you have this mistake. Oh, they say, oh, we'll get better, but that really doesn't happen. And this is just an example how you can really question the quality of the peer review and editorial process. So this is from a very respected and impactful journal, The Cell. And then if you just notice here, and Lex would probably like this as a statistician, they say the data are averages plus minus means. Mean and average are the same, so there should be a standard deviation or something. And then you wonder, how come that nobody saw this? Okay, you may say, okay, researchers may not know, they didn't know statistics, but what about reviewers? What about editors? Did anyone with the common sense ever read this paper? And then again, you question, what are journals there for? How we ensure that what we published is correct and that we can, both us as journals, editors and researchers can stand behind it. And it's not easy for us today. When you look in the past, more than 350 years ago, the first journals were published, and they were usually the work of a single person, and this is just an excerpt from the Royal Transactions, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in London. They digitized all of their issues, so you can read the first articles in the first issue from 1665. Nowadays, we have what is called enhanced publication. With the digital publication, what we present is so complex and so detailed that it's very difficult to keep track of it. But again, there is more visibility, so it's much easier to see when something is wrong. And this is just an example of enhanced publication, which you see every day. So you can have interactive charts, interactive maps. You can have all kinds of experimental flow charts, stimuli examples, presentation, related articles. So there is a lot of information that is in there, and that puts a lot of tasks and duties for the editors to keep track of it and ensure that everything is correct. And nowadays, and I say this especially, most of the guidance and policies for publication integrity comes from biomedicine because of what we publish. So we do not expect from authors that they just give us the results of their research. Very often it takes you really long to submit an article because we ask for all kinds of declarations about authorship, about conflicts of interest, about disclosure of financial support, ensuring that the research was done ethically, approval from ethics committees, registration of clinical trials, privacy rights for the patients and so on, image manipulation too. So I'm just going to go through this and see and kind of show examples of how we as editors deal with that. We have our strengths and weaknesses, and there are opportunities and threats around us that we do our job to protect the integrity of the published record. So I will just kind of go through this and show examples. As far as the strengths go, I think that editors really are a power figure, like you talked this morning in research, but actually on a good side. So what editors say, people listen because everybody wants to publish their article in a journal. And we do have authority in scientific community also because most of us and almost all of us are either active researchers or have been researchers that went to be professional editors. So we have the expertise in research, and we also have this duty to protect and responsibility for the integrity of what is published, and we have the power to formulate the policies of a journal to make it better. And we are getting better at it. If you go to the PubMed, which is a major biomedical database, and you can go to a special site that lists all the retractions, you can see that as of last week, we have more than 7,000 retractions, which is an enormous increase from a long time ago. I think that the first retraction was in 50s. not because there weren't research misconduct then, but we are much better in catching it and correcting the literature. Before, a retraction was a shame for a journal. Nobody liked to do that. And now today is a badge of honor. It's a sign of a good researcher, of a good editor that corrects the literature and does what must be done when it has to be done. Of course, there are problems with this, you know, the formulation of the retraction notice, how to publish it, when to publish it. And also, we also want to honor errors, because sometimes an article has to be retracted because of an error, not because of a misconduct, but everything is turned retractions. So now you have also, we are developing a possibility of retraction and replacement in cases of serious errors that change the conclusions of a paper. But this is now, we have problems in how to index that. So there are new developments also coming about honoring honest error in research. We can also express concern. When there is an allegation of something going, then the editors can publish expressions of concerns, which also gets indexed. Sometimes, as you see here, you may have to remove the expression of concern, which sometimes can be a problem for a journal. You may get sued and so on. But these are the two tools that we can correct the literature in a way that we remove, not physically, but intellectually remove the results that are not correct. And also, when I look at myself as a journal editor, and I have been one for more than 25 years of 2 different journals, as a single journal editor, that we have a lot of opportunities for us, because we have international bodies of different types at different continents that constantly talk about the problems in publication integrity and try to come up with the solutions that we can make our work transparent and what is published, that what is published has integrity. You have a Council of Science Editor, European Association of Science Editor, and the famous ICMJE, which sets actually the frontier of editorial policies in biomedicine, World Association of Medical Editors, and of course you are probably all know COPE, Committee on Publication Ethics, and their flowcharts, and help both for everybody involved in the process of research integrity. For example, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors doesn't tell just how to structure your manuscript and what you have to have in it, but most of its advice and guidance is about the roles of different stakeholders in publishing, and also for us editors about how we go about doing our job of publishing editorial issues, how we deal with different issues that can affect the integrity of what is published. We have COPE flowcharts. We have now, it's a standard that all submission systems have inbuilt plagiarism checks or similarity text checks so that we can deal with it. It's not sometimes very easy, but we don't have time to go into detail in there. And for example, this is a flowchart that was newly developed about what editors do when there is an allegation of a manipulated digital image. We can also have tools like you can beautify yourself in a Photoshop for your Instagram picture and so on. And that also is true for your gels or digital images. We as editors can detect that. So we can download macros into Adobe Photoshop from the Office of Research Integrity, and we can see what has been manipulated with it. And this is something that is quite old. It comes from 2014, so more than 15 years ago, where a journal that dealt a lot with the digital images said, you cannot change the information on a photograph. You can make it brighter, you can increase contrast, but the information shouldn't be lost, so that, for example, from a gel that is your real gel, you come to this little line in your published work. Or again, this is something that, again, David Walsh shows. So this is what was presented in the journal, nice lines, but then when you look at for all the adjustments, you see all kinds of patchwork here and all the things that shouldn't be in a proper digital image. And this is something that is really very useful. Also, we as editors have a lot of weaknesses. We usually don't have any mandate for legal actions. We cannot do anything without you. So we usually have to report back to the institution. We can, for example, deal with duplicate publication. If somebody publishes something twice in 2 different journals, we can check the dates, and then the journal that published later can regardless of what authors or their institutions say, we can retract that article. But most often we have to wait for the institution or the researchers to come back and to deal with it so that we can correct the literature. We have few means of action. As I said, we can retract, we can express concern, we can publish corrections, but it usually comes from the authors. And it's not easy to be involved in big scandals. It can damage the journal's reputations, although it's a bit changing now. And it's very time-consuming and resource-consuming. For example, in the New England Journal of Medicine, you have one person that checks whether the trials that are submitted are correctly registered in a trials database. For most of the journals that are small and scholarly journals with volunteer or part-time editors, this is not possible because there is not enough staff to do all this work properly. An example is authorship. Usually you expect us editors to make judgments on authorship. It's not up to us. We don't make judgments. We just publish what authors say, what they say they contributed, but we have expectations. So we come with the definitions that are kind of not promissory, but they are expectational. They set really a high standard, and this is the current authorship definition in biomedicine set by the ICMJE, where you have to be involved in the work, where you have to contribute to writing, where everybody has to approve, and what was added recently is that everybody has to be accountable for the accuracy and integrity of what is published. Today I looked at the DFG code, codex in your English translation, and there, for example, you, instead of and, Boolean operators, you have or. For your definition of authorship is, if you do any of these, you're an author. And you have to, of course, approve the final version. So even in a field of a single field, you may have different definitions of authorship, and we know that the question of authorship is really a very delicate one. We also have threats because in many countries, and now it's getting much better with all the, especially in Europe, with all the drive towards the importance of research integrity. But before there was very little legal regulation, culture of research integrity, no training available, lack of support from different stakeholders, and pressures of editors and journals. And that's where institutions also can exert pressures of journal editors. But what can we do? And this was a question that we ask ourselves, and this is comes from Richard Smith, who was the former editor of the BMJ, and in one of his essays, he looked at whether editors can lead and make the change, or should they follow, legal changes or changes in the community. And he said, and he quoted the Dr. Clegg, who was the former editor of the BMJ, who said that the duty of journals and journal editors is to keep the problem in front of the public until the public demands reform. And this is what we do. We want to talk about research integrity and the importance of research integrity until the whole community stands behind it and really makes a change for research integrity. And we as editors do have a power, and this is where we exert power. And an example is registration of clinical trials. Following scandals of drugs that had to be retracted because of false results reporting in big journals, the journal said, we don't want to see any trial paper if we do not know what was planned, what was the protocol that you planned, so that we can check your results against the protocol. And we introduced in 2004 the mandatory registration policy for submission of reporting of clinical trials to a journal. And if you look at the clinicals.gov, which is the largest database of trials in the United States, we said, everything that you did before, you have to register the protocol until September 15. And you see the increase that everybody, although this was not a legal regulation in USA and in Europe with the European Medicine Agency came later on. But the editors were first to make this huge change that we now have a better transparency about clinical trials, which is very important for health practice. We also developed within the ICMJE the conflict of interest form. We know that conflicts of interest are important and that it's very difficult to see what is happening, and to the whole understanding of conflict of interest is not clear even to the editors. I remember when we were creating this form, the editor of JAMA said, oh, you have to have an MBA from economy, in order to understand all of the things that we are asking, the shareholding and bureau speakers and these shares and funds and this and that. So it was really very difficult. And what ICMJE have seen over the years from 2010 when this form was introduced, that there is still, first of all, a stigma of conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest when you say that everybody thinks what you're declaring is actual conflict of interest. So just recently they have put up a new definition, a new conflict of interest form on their site and open it for discussion, which you may be interested in, because they say we're not going to use that term. We are going to ask for disclosure of relevant relationship and activities. They can be financial and non-financial, and they can be, they don't have to create a conflict, but you have to report your activities and relationships. And what they say, we want to have them from public disclosures, from public registries. Unfortunately, we don't have such a database of conflict of interest in Europe. Because of the GDPR, because you would have to ask each person for consent and so on. But in the United States, the Association of American Medical Colleges have created the Convey database where you can deposit your conflicts of interest, update on a regular basis, and automatically transfer it to the journals. So no need to fill it again and again each time you submit to a journal. So these are the new developments that may really increase the quality and transparency of conflicts of interest. But I think this is something that has just started and we need more time to do that. And finally, I want to finish with how journal editors and institutions can collaborate. And I have to go back to World Conference of Research Integrity, Lex. And it all started in 2010 in Singapore, where there were track sessions talking about what are the responsibilities of authors and editors for responsible research and responsible publishing. And based on that, there were two initiatives discussed at the World Conference of Research Integrity in Amsterdam in 2017, and two guidance pieces came out of that, Clue and Repair. Clue is about collaboration between universities and editors, what would be the best practices for research integrity, and the Repair guidance are about how to manage misconduct-related retractions, so how institutions and editors should collaborate when something has to be retracted because of misconduct. And I'm not going through them in detail. I will just point out a few important things. And from Clue, for us as journal editors, it would be really important to know who we can contact to. Usually when you have a allegation of misconduct, you have to contact the authors, but also the institution, and you don't know who to contact. So really it's important to see and to find on universities or schools' web pages somebody that we as journal editors can contact. And I know some journals that will not accept a submission of a manuscript unless the authors state the name of the research integrity officer or ombudsman who they can contact in case of any allegations. They also have to what we would like to see is that the mechanisms to assess the validity of research reports is different from the procedures to determine whether somebody conducted misconduct. Because it may take years till the final decision is made and that paper stays on and people cite it and use it in research and it's false. So it would be important to kind of maybe separate these two processes. And it would be important to keep data for long, because usually these cases last for a long time, and when journals get alerted, it may be too late and the data may be destroyed. And also for us, it's sometimes difficult because when you look at COPE guidance and flowcharts, we would have to first contact the author. But there are instances that if we contact the author, then things may change. Data may be deleted, destroyed, and there will be no investigation. So what would be the cases and instances where journal editors should first contact the institution and not the authors? And this, we thought, needed more discussion. And also how to deal with anonymous or pseudo-anonymous allegations. And also, we also think that everybody involved, not only the journal that has written first to the university, but all the pieces that were published, all the publications need to be corrected or retracted after a misconduct allegation and conclusion of a case, so that all the literature is corrected. And also for the repair consensus guidance for institutions, the guidance is that, again, they have a person that journal can talk to, that its contacts are visible, and that institutions should, as soon as possible, identify what needs to be corrected and retracted, and that they have to cooperate and answer when journal editors have questions or have problems. And for editors, we have to have clear policies. We have to notify the institution in cases where there are allegations. We need to collaborate on determining what needs to be corrected, what needs to be retracted. We have to cooperate with institutional investigation and not just, not answer queries from journals, and publish freely so that it is an open access what is corrected or retracted or when concern was expressed, and also to ensure that the retracted and corrected articles are clearly identifiable, and that means that they are published on a page and they have a page, they have a title, retraction, correction, because otherwise indexing databases will not see it as a retraction. You cannot write an editorial where you, among other things, retract something. It has to be a separate bibliographical item in a published journal. And instead of a conclusion, that's why I wear this pin, I just want to draw your attention to a newly developed Wikimedia platform for research integrity that was funded by the EU, where information about everything about research ethics and research integrity can be on, and I invite you also to share your experiences, your data about that. Because, and I'm going to finish with a citation from a recent editorial in Nature, who said, it's nice to have these global policies, but the real work is where the research is made. It has to come from the researchers and their organization to build up the good practice of research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this wonderful presentation of a major player in science, and this is the view from an editor of a journal. So the paper is open for discussion. Please go to the microphone. There are two presentations, and we have two mics. Whoever is first.
Thank you very much for this very optimistic view of the publishing situation. I've been an editor myself, and I share some of your points, but not all of them. Now, I think one of the major issues with retractions is that all of the authors of a paper have to agree to the retraction before a paper is actually retracted. So why do publishing houses not solicit the implicit agreement of the authors that the paper is retracted if there is confirmed evidence of misconduct in the paper and in the entire study or in part of it? I think this would alleviate, or this would help make retractions faster, so that they do not contaminate the database of scientific literature.
Okay, so the retractions can be done in three ways. It can be done by the editor. As I said, when you have a duplicate publication, then we can do it ourselves. We don't need approval from the authors. It can be by the authors, and it can be by the institution. If the institution concludes that this paper is not valid and should be retracted, we don't need that all authors agree. If we actually would go with the institution's decision and not the author's kind of a discussion of who wants what. So that's the policy.
Heinz Fehrenbach, Research Center Borstel. Could you please comment briefly on the role and the possibility you have as editors to raise the chance of negative findings getting more to journals, so getting more published?
Yeah, this is something, and some journals or some publishers have tried to start journals of negative results, which failed miserably. And unfortunately, we still know that although we are aware of the publication bias and non-publication, in health about 30% of the studies never gets published. about drugs, for example. That's why the effects of drugs are overestimated in current healthcare. And when you look at, and we have known that in 90s, and that's why reporting guidelines like CONSORT, saying what is the minimum information that you have to report from a trial so that systematic reviewers can implement it into synthesis of evidence and recommendations for practice. We still know that about 30%, even now, papers or research studies don't get published, which is unfortunate. Even when you look at research on peer review, we have done a study on where researchers who research publication bias publish, and again 30% of their publications never get published. So this seems to be kind of a deeper problem of scientific research and our being impressed by positive results, which are usually because you throw coin only 10 times and not 1,000 times and you get positive results. So we are aware of the problems, and actually in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks' time, there will be a conference here in Berlin on research waste. It's called Reward Equator Conference. Lex will be there too, which is just about this, how we can reduce waste, how we can promote negative results. And for example, in psychology, the problem of replication is huge because, there are studies that show that you cannot repeat dogmas because the studies are not reproducible. So this is something that needs a much kind of broader and more in-depth approach to understand first and then to try to correct.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see. Yeah. You're perfect in time. Thank you very much again.
You.